Assalamu alaikum. How is everyone doing? Welcome to another episode of Muslim Skeptic Live. Alhamdulillah, this is our fifth episode. Alhamdulillah, I started this as an experiment, wanted to see how people would respond and if I could maintain consistency. Alhamdulillah, I'm happy with the response, and I'm glad that I've been able to keep it fairly consistent, and of course always trying to improve and get better. So actually, let me see. I was testing something with the camera settings the other day. Let me see if I can improve the camera a little bit. Hopefully it won't mess anything up. Let's try it. Yeah, so the white balance is always way off with this Logitech webcam. Let's see if this adds more color so I don't look like a ghost. Okay, hopefully that's better. Let me also move this so the camera doesn't shake. Okay, so alhamdulillah, I'm excited to be talking with you all, inshallah, about an important topic, which is the topic of don't judge me. Don't judge me. This is an argument that we hear very often, increasingly within Muslim conversations on social media. We're hearing these kinds of arguments in masajid, MSAs. I mean, this is a staple of MSA or Islamic society conversations, this idea of judging. Do we alienate people with our judgment? Are we marginalizing certain segments of the Muslim community because we're too judgy, too judgmental? And now we're having this new phenomenon. It's relatively new, maybe about 5, 6, 7 years of so-called third spaces, and I'll explain what those are exactly. But basically, they're not masajid. They're just usually a space that's rented out, and you have, Islam light essentially being taught. A lot of things happen in these third spaces that are problematic, at least the ones that are being promoted the most heavily. So we want to talk about this phenomenon of third spaces being unmasked. Maybe you've heard of this expression. Someone is unmasked. There's even a documentary on this idea of being unmasked and how Muslims were so dissatisfied with the masjid and they felt so judged and so alienated that they don't want to come to the masjid anymore. In fact, some of them will leave Islam because they just are not accepted for who they are. So this is something that we'll want to discuss and analyze. Third spaces. In addition to third spaces, something else that's related to the concept of judgment and being judged is hijab. So this is something that we also want to look at. The discourse, the conversations on social media and in some communities has become really out of hand. It's just out of control, the things that people are saying now about hijab and what is acceptable hijab, who is or is not allowed to talk about hijab, is telling someone or advising someone to wear hijab, is that a form of sexual harassment? This is something new that's come up and people are talking about. So we want to look at all of these issues and analyze don't judge me with respect to these two areas, hijab and third spaces. So before I continue, let me just check and make sure that everything's okay with the stream. 1 second. Okay. Someone's saying the camera is good. Thank you for letting me know. Okay. Yeah, so thank you for joining me again. Today, alhamdulillah, is a nice and chilly, cold day here in Houston, Texas. I like cold weather. I like chilly weather. It's rainy and cloudy. And I like that kind of weather because it makes me feel cozy to be inside and to be indoors. One interesting thing that I want to note before we get to the topic of don't judge me is that today I was once again censored by Facebook. I had a post that I had linked an article from MuslimSkeptic.com in which I address this new political party within Israel. It's called the Jewish Power Party. And this party is, let me show you the article, 1 second. This party is overtly pro-Judaism and very overt in thinking that Israel is just for Jews. Israel needs to expel non-Jews, and Israel needs to take over all of the Palestinian territories, and just very charged racist, genocidal rhetoric. And that's pretty much all of the political parties in Israel. But this one, this party is considered even further right than even Netanyahu, and even the seemingly most anti-Muslim, anti-Palestinian political parties within Israel. So what was so interesting about this is that you had AIPAC and you had some other Zionist organizations like the American Jewish Committee within the US denouncing this political party, which is something really unprecedented. I don't recall AIPAC or AJC or the ADL, Anti-Defamation League, really denouncing a particular party within Israel. So this was news over the past few days that AIPAC and these other Zionist lobbying groups were denouncing a political party. And so I just, reported on this within MuslimSkeptic.com, shared this tweet, and then I posted this on Facebook. And then what happens, to my surprise, is that within 30 minutes of posting it, Facebook takes it down and says that this violates their hate speech guidelines. It violates their hate speech community guidelines. Why? What is so hateful about reporting on AIPAC? What's so hateful about reporting on the internal dynamics of Zionist politics and the way that they're, reacting to this particular political party called the Jewish Power Party? So this is just another, more evidence of how much speech and commentary is restricted on social media. Obviously, within the mainstream media, TV, radio, and newspaper, so forth, you're not going to get much criticism or fair critique of Israel at all because, obvious why. But now even alternative media, even social media is being heavily regulated, and anything that can be seen as being contrary to certain Zionist interests is being blocked, is being censored, it's being banned. Facebook has been taking action against certain Facebook pages. Certain pages have been completely taken down because of their criticisms of Israel. And I linked within my Facebook page an article from The Intercept from Glenn Greenwald where he was reporting back in 2016, how Israel, individuals within the Israeli government were working closely with Facebook and other social media platforms to regulate quote-unquote hate speech and quote-unquote anti-Semitism. Anything that is critical of Israel is considered hateful anti-Semitic. So this is really the first time something related to Zionism from me has been taken down. Hopefully it's not going to escalate, but Allahu Alam, we'll see. We'll see if I'll be able to continue to post anything Zionist or Israel related on my Facebook page. I hope that they don't deplatform me. I hope that they don't take me off. That's part of the motivation that I had for creating MuslimSkeptic.com, having an independent website that Facebook can't, get their paws on, basically, and shut down if it doesn't meet a certain kind of the requirements of a certain kind of agenda. So I just wanted to note that before getting to the main topic of discussion, which is judgment and not judging people. So let me start, inshallah, as I have been doing, by reciting from the Quran. 1 second. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وإذا قيل له اتق الله أخذته العزة بالإثم فحسبه جهنم ولبئس المهاد ومن الناس من يشري نفسه ابتغاء مرضات الله والله رؤوف بالعباد يا أيها الذين آمنوا ادخلوا في السلم كافة ولا تتبعوا خطوات الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين صدق الله العظيم. So Allah says, and when it is said to him, fear Allah, ittaqillah, he is led by arrogance, izzah, to ithm. He's led by his pride to more ithm, to more crime, to more sin. And then Allah says, enough for this person is Jahannam, hellfire. And indeed it is an evil abode or resting place. And then Allah says, and of mankind is he who would sell himself, seeking the pleasure of Allah. Yashri nafsahu. He would sell his nafs, seeking the pleasure of Allah, and Allah is full of kindness to his slaves. So this is the contrast. The one who is told, ittaqillah, his pride takes him to more sin. He is more wanting to engage in that sinful behavior rather than taking the nasiha, taking the reminder, ittaqillah, fear Allah, and refraining from evil, refraining from sin, refraining from the crime that he is committing openly. It's told to him, ittaqillah, and he is driven by izzah, his pride, to do more. And then someone else is going to go so far as selling his nafs, selling the nafs, seeking the pleasure of Allah, seeking the pleasure of Allah, and Allah is kind, merciful to his slaves. And then Allah says, O you who believe, يا أيها الذين آمنوا ادخلوا, enter perfectly in Islam. كافة. Enter perfectly in Islam, completely into Islam, and do not follow خطوات الشيطان, the footsteps of shaitan, of Satan. Indeed, he is عدو مبين, clear enemy. Shaitan is the clear enemy. So I think this is very relevant, these ayat, to the topic of judgment. And this is something that, to really understand judgment when it comes to Islam, you can't really separate this topic of judgment from Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi anil Munkar, right? Enjoining the good and forbidding the munkar, the evil, and evil and wrongdoing. So we know the importance of this action of we enjoin good, we forbid evil. That is what makes Islam Islam. This is a central component of Islam. It's such an important thing. It is as if, and some of the scholars have said, it is as if this enjoyment of good and forbidding of evil is like the sixth pillar of Islam, meaning it's so important, and it's emphasized over and over again in the Quran. And the most famous ayah in this regard is from Surah Al-Imran, where Allah says, "Kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat linnas." You're the best nation, the best ummah, produced, brought out, ukhrijat linnas, for mankind. تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر وتؤمنون بالله. You command good, you enjoin good, and you forbid evil, munkar, wrongdoing, and you believe in Allah. So Allah is telling us that this is what makes, these are the qualities that make Muslims, make the Ummah an example, a guide, a leader, the leader of nations, because we engage in this practice. We engage in this practice of commanding good and forbidding evil, commanding good and forbidding evil. And so this is perfectly tied to judgment, the topic of judgment. And so as we discuss these issues, we're going to hit on these themes over and over again. Enjoining good, forbidding evil, izzah, pride, the nafs, overcoming the nafs, shaitan, Satan, and how he is trying to undermine us by feeding into our egos, by feeding into our shahawat, by making us feel justified in doing evil, right? Telling us not to listen to those who are telling us to fear Allah. The lack of fearing of Allah. These are all important themes that we're going to touch on again and again in the next hour and a half, inshallah. Okay, so let me pause for questions. Dean Reminder is commenting, "I love you and please know that your contribution is highly valuable and deserves much more highlight than receives. Jazakallah khairah." Thank you so much for your encouragement. I appreciate that. In YouTube, let's see, any questions? Hasanat Ahmed says, "I don't have time to watch this. I'll watch the upload. I just want to say we love you." Daniel, Jazakallah khairah. I love you guys too. Thank you for just tuning in, and inshallah the upload will be ready right after the broadcast, inshallah. Okay, here's a good question from the Mazagrian. Daniel, I have a question on, is the hijab forced in a Muslim land What are the opinions of the scholars in this regard? Okay, so I'm going to try to, inshallah, address this question. I think it's a very pertinent, relevant, important question, because there are some countries in the world today, Muslim countries, where they enforce hijab. Women have to cover their hair when they go out into public. And these kinds of laws and regulations have kind of fallen off recently. Like, they're not enforced as much in countries like Iran or Saudi Arabia. And you have these feminist activists who are going out of their way to take off their hijab in public as an act of defiance and quote-unquote liberation by taking off the hijab. So this is something that I've talked about in the past. We should definitely talk about it now when we talk about hijab. But hijab is such a big topic. Hijab is such a big topic that we won't really have time to cover every facet of it in this hour and a half. We really need a lot more time, but I just want to connect the issue of hijab to the issue of judgment. And this don't judge me. I should be able to practice Islam however I want and behave however I want. And you don't even have the right to tell me that I'm wrong. You don't even have the right to complain. You don't even have the right to advise me or give me nasiha or say, ittaqillah, fear Allah. So this is something that we have to address. And I have people, come to me and say, Daniel, please address this issue. Please address, don't judge me, because there are so many youngsters who have this idea that judgment is something really bad. Judgment is something that is backwards and is only done by intolerant bigots, intolerant people who are so zealous and they're so out of touch with reality that they would dare to tell me I'm doing something wrong. They would dare to tell me to, wear my hijab properly, or to not go and talk to girls and mix with girls or the opposite sex. And so this is just completely not it. This is completely not what we need right now in the world today and with the Muslim community. So that's why I chose this topic specifically, and the two flashpoints, the two areas that I hear this issue of judgment coming up the most often is with hijab and third spaces. Okay. So let's step back. Let's step back and ask ourselves, is this idea of don't judge me, is this even something that's coherent? Is this something that even makes basic sense? Like, what does it mean not to judge? Judging is very simple. Again, I referred to Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi anil Munkar, where you enjoin good and you forbid evil. It's based on a moral standard. You have a moral standard, and then based on that moral standard, you judge right versus wrong. Right versus wrong. That's all that judgment means. It means distinguishing between those two things. So any kind of moral system that you have, any kind of standard of ethics, any kind of morality has to have judgment. You cannot have morality without judgment. These things go hand in hand. And you can see it practically when it comes to the legal system. All countries have legal systems, right? You have the law of the land. That law has to be able to judge. There has to be a judge, a qadi, who determines who has broken the law and who is innocent, who has not broken the law, right? So the law is just an expression of morality, ethics. So how can you have any situation, any society, any country, any community where there is no judgment, where you don't have judging? If you don't have judgment, that means there are no ethics. There is no morality. There is no right and wrong. Inherent within the very concept, inherent to the very idea conceptually of morality, normativity is the philosophical term, if you've read this or seen this, normativity. Within the very inherent concept of normativity, you have to have judgment. Because you have right and wrong. And you have to be able to distinguish those two. You have to be able to distinguish those two. So, on a purely abstract philosophical level, how can we claim that judgment has no place? Or judgment is something inherently wrong. Judgment is something inherently marginalizing. Well, yeah, of course. Of course, judgment is about marginalization. Of course, judgment is about alienation. Of course, judgment is about feeling bad. It does not feel good to be judged. It does not feel good to be judged. No doubt about it. But that's what it means to live under a moral system. That is what it means to live in a law-abiding society, a law-abiding community, a community that has a system of ethics, right and wrong. Of course, you have to have ethical standards, and of course, you have to have the ability to regulate people's behavior, to encourage good and discourage bad, discourage evil, discourage misbehavior. Of course. You can't avoid this. How can you avoid it? Any context that you give me. The university system. If you're a university student, universities have codes of ethics, ethical principles. And the academic board, for example, or the dean will be able to judge student behavior according to those codes of ethics. If a student violates those ethics by, for example, cheating on an exam or copying someone's work or plagiarizing or what have you, then the dean, of course the dean has to judge. Of course the academic board has to give consequences to punish violators of those codes of ethics. Of course. Who would dispute this? Who would have a problem with this? Who would say, no, we don't need any ethical standard. We shouldn't have any normal standards for normal, decent behavior. If you do get rid of ethics, if you do get rid of standards of moral behavior, what is the result? You get chaos. You get chaos, you get destruction, you get, people hurting and violating each other. Killing each other. If there's no ethical standard, if there's no moral standard. And that's why any kind of organized structure or community will have to have, almost by definition, a standard of ethics and morality. But we nonetheless hear people say, don't judge me. Don't judge me. You are making me feel so judged, and this is alienation, and this is marginalization, and I don't like it. So how does this make sense? What do they really mean? What's interesting is that the people who are saying, don't judge me, are usually extremely judgmental people themselves. The people who are saying, don't judge me, bro. Don't judge me. I'm, living my life however I like it. Who are you to tell me to dress a certain way, act a certain way, talk a certain way, eat a certain way? Who are you? You can't judge me. The people who are saying that usually are the most judgmental people themselves. But they're judging not according to Islamic standards, Islamic ethics. They're judging according to a different ethical system. Usually, with a very liberal, a very leftist ethical system, standard of morality. These people who are on the forefront of pushing judgment-free zones and judgment-free spaces and, oh, we don't judge, we're non-judgmental, they're the ones who are also blasting masajid. They're blasting imams. They're calling imams, oh, this backwards foreign. This is a foreign imam. He doesn't get it. He's not relevant. He's foreign. He speaks with an accent. He's not, who is he? Who does he think he is to teach me about Islam? He's not relevant. He's not culturally in tune with, movies and lingo and so forth. Or, all of this social media buzz and controversy over all male panels. All male panels. This is what I talked about a couple of episodes ago, a few episodes ago. All male panels. You have to judge, right? You have to judge and say, oh, this panel, it's all men. There's not a single woman in sight on this panel. Therefore, this is inappropriate. It's invalid. We have to boycott it. We have to go on a social media campaign. That's judgment. That's judgment. What else is judgment then? You're judging that organization, that masjid, that panel. What happened to no judgment? What happened to, judgment-free zone? I don't want to judge anyone. I don't want anyone to judge me. They're the most judgmental people. They're the most judgmental people. These activists, these leftist Muslims are the ones who are the most judgmental when it comes to, this is bigotry, this is, intolerant, this is not intersectional enough, this is not fighting the patriarchy enough. This is all judgment. This is all normative judgment. That kind of judgment is okay. That judgment's acceptable. That judgment is needed according to them. But if we want to judge according to Islam, if we want to judge according to the standards of the Sharia and the divine sacred law, no, don't judge me. We don't need to be judged by that. So you can see, even within this very theoretical, on this very theoretical abstract level, the idea of don't judge me is incoherent. Frankly, it's incoherent. Okay, so what do you guys think about this? Yeah, so Shahzar says, unfortunately, we live in a time where people think our values are evil and destructive. Our values are evil and destructive. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the problem. That's why you have these activists and leftist Muslims who are going to judge very severely when it comes to the liberal standard of morality, liberal ethics, leftist ethical intuitions. They're going to be very judgmental on that basis because that's what the culture is. That's what they are embedded in, and that's what they take to be intuitive. But when it comes to the Sharia, when it comes to Islamic standards, on those areas that conflict with the modern culture, then don't judge me, okay? But on everything else that does align with and gel with the modern culture, then that's where they're judgmental. and they do a lot of judgment. They do a lot of denunciation and a lot of attacks and a lot of criticism for anything that will contradict that standard of morality and ethics. So it's very clearly, plainly a double standard. So this is why we should just not acknowledge or accept people who use this argument about not judging. This is not something that we should cater to within our communities. And I'm going to talk more in detail about different kinds of objections that people bring on this issue. Okay, here's a good question from Sister Maryam. How should one respond when he's told, you can't judge me because you haven't experienced what I have experienced? So, morality doesn't work like that. Ethics don't work like that. If you commit a crime and you violate ethics, like you break the law, if you go in front of the judge and the judge says, well, you broke the law, the evidence is clear, you're guilty of this crime, and the jury has convicted you, so here's your sentence, the criminal can't say, well, you haven't experienced what I've experienced. You haven't gone through what I've gone through. Therefore, how dare you judge me and sentence me as a criminal? That would be nonsensical. That would be absurd. No one would say that. No one would even think to say that. Why? Because, well, that's the accepted standard of morality. You have the law of the land, which is a secular liberal law in the modern West and increasingly throughout the world. But why does that differ when it comes to Islamic morality, when it comes to Islam's moral standards? Right? Let me give you an example, okay, just to transition into this topic of hijab specifically on judgment. There was one of these conventions in the US, and it was a convention where you had a panel discussion, and there was a couple of activists on the panel and then a imam. And basically the topic of that panel, I wasn't sure, I don't remember what the topic was, but what the imam gave a particular story that I thought was very interesting. The imam told a story of how he was in the Muslim world, in one of these countries, it might have been Jordan, and he was at a cafe, and he was, drinking shay at that cafe, and at the counter of that cafe, there was a man who had tattoos, covering his arms, clean shaven, just didn't look like the most practicing Muslim. And he was at the cafe, and then there was a woman who came through, and the woman was inappropriately dressed. She wasn't really covered much at all. And then the guy with the tattoos notices this and turns around and tells her basically, sister, you shouldn't, walk outside like this. You shouldn't walk outside with dressed in this kind of inappropriate way. And he just essentially was telling her to, giving her nasiha that this is wrong. You shouldn't be dressed like this. So the imam just was observing this, and he was relaying this story to the audience at this session. And he was using this example to say that, look at how wrong this is. The guy is covered in tattoos. He is clean shaven, but he feels like he can go and turn around and tell this sister how to dress, how to wear hijab. So that's wrong. That's judgment. Like, it's not No man should tell a woman. No man should tell a woman how to dress. Something like this. And so, subhanAllah, this is, and the activists on that panel were in agreement, like, yeah, exactly right. You're saying it right, Sheikh. But this is very wrong. Like, this is a very wrong attitude. Because think about like this, and imagine, okay, the same exact scenario. Imagine the same exact scenario where you have that tattoo guy in the cafe, and then the sister comes, okay, and what she does is, she makes some kind of racist remark to the person serving her tea or coffee. She makes some kind of she used some kind of racial slur. She said something that is racist. And then that tattoo guy comes and says, sister, you shouldn't use this kind of language. You shouldn't, be racist and belittle this employee at the cafe with that kind of racist language. Shame on you. Shame on you for this kind of behavior. In that example, would we say, oh, that guy, he shouldn't judge. He shouldn't judge her racism. It's none of his business. He should, he has tattoos. Look at him. He doesn't even have his own life together. How dare he chastise and correct this sister? Judge her like that. Right? So do you guys see the double standard here? This is exactly what I mean. Like, when it comes to a liberal leftist morality and ethics, then yeah, we have to judge. It doesn't matter if where you are in your life. You have to be able to tell people racism is wrong, or imagine like environmentalism. Okay? Some guy is driving on the street, throwing trash out of his car. He's driving like a huge SUV, gas guzzling. And, someone says, come on, man, you're smogging up the environment. You're polluting. You're throwing your trash. We can do better. I'm not perfect, but we can do better. Okay, this is also Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi Anil Munkar. This is also, when it comes to pollution, like this is where Islamic ethics and the liberal ethics actually are aligned. Would anyone say, "Oh, don't tell someone not to pollute"? That's judging them. Judging them is bad. You shouldn't judge. We should all just tolerate and accept everyone, no matter what. No one would say this. Why? Why do we have this double standard? We can't talk about the issue of judgment and don't judge me, bro, unless we address this double standard. Take it back. Like, if you ever get asked this question and you get these standard arguments of, oh, you haven't experienced what I've experienced. Like, how is that relevant? How is that relevant when it comes to Islam? How is it relevant with any ethical system? I already gave you an example from like the secular ethics, the law of the land, but also think about Islam. Our ethics, our standards of morality are coming from Allah, the Creator, who has created all of us, created all of creation. Allah is the one who's sending guidance and standards of morality. And the Prophet ﷺ is communicating this to us and teaching us and conveying the message. But the Prophet ﷺ hasn't experienced everything that every human being in the world has ever experienced. That's impossible. He's just a human being. The Prophet ﷺ is just a human being. But that doesn't mean he doesn't have a right. When he doesn't have the right to teach, or he can't like convey morality and standards of ethics. That's irrelevant. That's completely irrelevant to our ability to judge people and to talk about what is right and wrong. Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi Anil Munkar. Okay, this is an important topic from Sarah, or Sarah, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, but she says, often what some people mean when they say don't judge me is don't judge my iman, or my level of piety, or my closeness to Allah, based on my outward appearance and actions, because you can't know that. You can't know a person's inner state. Absolutely. Thank you for this important point that you're making. I was going to make this point, but you've brought it up in the questions, that yes, of course, the whole notion of hisba, the whole notion of amr bil ma'ruf wa nahi anil munkar, is you're judging by the apparent. And this is coming from the statement of Umar radiallahu anhu, where he says this: we judge by the apparent, what is apparent of people. We don't pretend to know what is actually in their hearts. We don't pretend to know their state of iman. For all you know, the person that you are advising and giving nasiha and telling them ittaqillah, for all you know, that person could be a wali. That person could be min al-awliya. Right? You know what wali means? Someone who is so close to Allah. You might not know that. That you won't know that. That could be the person that you're advising. Right? But that doesn't change the obligation, the necessity to be able to enjoin good and forbid evil. Of course, we don't know. Like, you should always think. Okay, this is so important. I'm going to talk about both sides, right? Because there are situations where we have to enjoin good and forbid evil. And this is what Allah commands us to do, and what the Prophet ﷺ commanded us to do. If we see something wrong, we change it with our hands. If we cannot change it with our hands, we change it with our tongues by speaking out essentially against it. And if we can't do that, then we hate it in our hearts, and that's the lowest level of iman. This famous hadith from the Prophet ﷺ. So we're either in a position where we're giving nasiha, we're enjoining good and forbidding evil, or we are the ones who it's being told ittaqillah. We are the ones who are receiving advice and nasiha. And how do we respond to that? Because that's also an important consideration, right? Because in that ayah, in those two ayat, which were from Surah Al-Baqarah, by the way, I forgot to mention that, from Surah Al-Baqarah. There are two reactions. When you're advised, when you're told to fear Allah, are you going to have izzah and pride in the bad sense and do more of the sin to go even further? Is that your reaction? That is a kind of satanic, nafsi kind of response. Your nafs is telling you, who is this to tell me what to do? Who is this? How dare they? How dare they tell me that I should change my behavior, or that I should fear Allah? How dare someone think that they can advise me? This is nafs. This is nafs. And it's a satanic kind of response. It's this kind of arrogance that defines shaitan. When shaitan disobeyed Allah, and Allah told him to prostrate out of respect to Adam alayhi salam. Allah told the angels and shaitan and Iblis to prostrate, make sajda out of respect to Adam alayhi salam, the new creation of Allah. And he refused and said, I'm made of fire and he's made of clay. I'm superior to him, essentially. I'm superior to him. So this kind of nafs. So we have to be very careful. We have to be very fearful that we don't fall into this. We have to think of ourselves as being so low. This is our test. This is the test of the nafs. We don't walk around thinking that, oh, we're so good, we're so righteous, we're so important. No, that's not how believers think of themselves. The believer is fearing Allah, taqwa. The believer has khashya, has this kind of meekness and modesty and fear and awe of Allah. This is what fear of Allah is based on. You minimize yourself. You minimize the nafs. If someone comes and tells you, oh, do this, you're doing something wrong, and you know that they're right, okay? They are telling you something that you know that this is in Islam. You know that they have a point. But you feel this resistance. Your heart gets hard. We've experienced this. Everyone has experienced this. That's the test. In that moment where you feel that in your chest, how are you going to respond to that? And Allah is, subhanAllah, the Quran perfectly describing the state of people. What is in the innermost heart, Allah is describing it in the most beautiful, sublime, perfect language. That either someone will get prideful and they'll say they're defiant. They have this izzah. Or they sell the self. Yashri nafsahu. They sell it. They get rid of the nafs. And they don't follow khutuwat al-shaytan, the footsteps of shaitan. So this is important. So we have to have a culture. Okay, this is when Allah is telling us that you are the best nation, taken as an example for people. You're the best nation because of تأمرون بالمعروف وتنهون عن المنكر وتؤمنون بالله. We have to take this to heart. Okay, have we created a culture of this kind of judgment? Yes. We don't need less judgment. We need more judgment. Judgment with wisdom, of course. Don't get me wrong. Judgment with wisdom, with hikmah. And this is a huge topic in and of itself. This is a huge topic in and of itself of what is the correct way to enjoin good and forbid evil. This is an important topic because everything has adab. Everything requires adab and khuluq. The best kind of khuluq. So that's something that I'm not trying to minimize. But we can't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Just because there might be some examples of individuals who are not enjoining good and forbidding evil in the best way, in the most wise way, that doesn't mean we say, oh, we need to get rid of judgment entirely. Or we shouldn't judge each other publicly. We shouldn't have judgment. No, we need to have public judgment. Yes, we need to have public judgment. We need to have public shame. We need to have public shame. Enjoining good and forbidding evil is not necessarily a private affair. You can be in a certain situation where you can enjoin good and forbid evil. And you have the authority to do that. You have the authority to speak, as the Prophet ﷺ has said. You have to change situations with your hands if you can, if it's practically within your ability and your sphere of influence. Okay, like for example, if you're a parent, you have children, and you have a spouse, you have a wife, right? If you're a man, you have a wife and children. This is your sphere of influence. You can, with your hands, change something that's wrong. And you have to do this. You have to do this. This is your circle. As the Prophet ﷺ has said, all of you are shepherds. Kullukum ra'in. All of you have a responsibility within your sphere of influence. It's not a judgment-free zone. There is no such thing as a judgment-free zone. And if we get to a point where it's a judgment-free zone, then this is destruction. This is chaos. This is sinking into all kinds of fasad and fahisha. And that's what we're seeing in the world today, unfortunately. Because what the liberal doctrine is saying, what the liberal culture is saying is that issues like how you dress and your sexual behavior, this is judgment free. People should have the choice and the ikhtiyar, or, basically like the liberty to just do whatever they want, to just behave however they want, to stick their genitals wherever they want. This is disastrous. This is the destruction of civilization. And this is what Allah tells us in the Quran, and this is what history has showed us. And there are historians who will say this. They'll say that you have the rise and fall of civilization. The rise and fall of civilization when civilization gets to a point of decadence and sexual promiscuity and this obsession with bodily pleasures and desires and eating the best foods and having the most luxurious clothes and all of these kinds of materialistic, hedonistic infatuations. This is when civilization collapses and falls. Okay? And this is, I think, these are historians who are observing what has happened historically, what has happened to civilizations. And this is exactly what Allah is telling us in the Quran. But are we taking heed? Are we taking heed of what Allah is telling us and showing us of what has happened to prior nations, prior civilizations who have gone down this path, who have ignored the commands of Allah, who have transgressed every bound? They have transgressed every bound, and of course they're going to be destroyed. They're going to be destroyed, and what has led them to that situation of decadence, part of the program is you have to silence the criticism. If you really want to enjoy, if you really want to roll around in the mud, in the filth, if you really want to ingratiate yourself on sex and alcohol and food and all of these kinds of decadence around us, if you really want to enjoy it, you can't have annoying people telling you to stop. You can't have annoying, judgmental people looking down on you and denouncing you and saying, stop it, ittaqillah, fear Allah, have some consciousness of God. These are pests. We don't want to hear this. We don't want this in our ear. We want to enjoy ourselves. We want to be free. We want to be liberated. We don't want to have this kind of judgment on us. And this is also related to another hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. The Prophet Rasulullah ﷺ has said, if you have no shame, do as you please. If you have no shame, do as you please. You have nothing holding you back. You have nothing you're not even openly, you're committing sins. Okay? All of humanity makes mistakes. Right? This is explicit from the words of the Prophet ﷺ, that all of mankind is making mistakes, but the best of men are those who are tawwabun, the ones who are constantly returning to tawbah, to asking for forgiveness, istighfar, right? But if you are proud, and you have this izzah, right? How is this izzah compatible with tawbah? How is this izzah compatible with istighfar, to returning to Allah? How is this tawbah consistent with you're openly doing wrong things? You're openly flouting the guidance and the rules of the Sharia, of Islamic ethics and principles. You're just openly doing it. If you're privately, like, you have enough shame that, okay, this is something shameful, I can't control myself, and I'm engaging in it. And then afterwards you feel shame and guilt, and you turn to Allah and you ask Allah for His forgiveness sincerely, and you'd say, I don't want to return to this. I don't want to return to this kind of shameful behavior. I hate it. And I'm praying that Allah will forgive me. But there's a chance that because of myself, because of how I am, there's a chance that because of myself, my afterlife is in danger. You feel that danger. You feel that fear. You feel that fear in your heart, and that's how you are turning to Allah as a modest, humbled slave. And this is what the ayah that I read earlier, that Allah is merciful and kind and loving to his ibad, to his slaves. So this is what we seek. We have to have this culture of shame. Yes, it's a culture of shame. Yes. A culture of judgment. Yes, we need to have judgment. And this applies to any kind of behavior. But let's focus on hijab, because there's some issues here. There are some misconceptions here when it comes to hijab. So let me share you this. Give me 1 second. Okay, this is from muslimgirl.com, a trash website in almost every sense. You have this article, hijab policing is sexual harassment, period. Just in case anyone had a question about this, no. The final word, hijab policing is sexual harassment, period. And it's written by this person, Amani al-Khatatbeh. I can't pronounce her name. But she's the founder of Muslim Girl. And so she's writing about this situation where you had a Muslim Instagram star who I had never heard about before this controversy. Her name is Dina Tokyo, I think. Or Dana. And so she made, this momentous decision to take off the hijab. And there was a big reaction on Muslim social media. There was a big reaction, and people were denouncing her. Some people were saying very ugly things, honestly, ugly things against her. And so a lot of people were not happy. And some were pointing out the I don't know if to call it hypocrisy or what, but she gained her following as this hijab wearing Muslima. That's how she got her popularity on Instagram and social media, and then now she is shedding it. She's taking off the hijab. She's doing this and that. So as soon as you reach a certain amount of fame, you kind of throw that Islamic observance away. So then this article from Muslim Girl is reflecting on that incident and going to the extent of saying that telling a Muslim sister about her hijab, or telling her, sister, you shouldn't dress like this, please be more modest, etc., etc. This is harassment. This is sexual harassment. This is like a new step. This is taking it to the next level. Now you're sexually harassing someone. Yeah. And so this is kind of the logic here, quoted a little bit. The fact that we simply don't and often can't police Muslim men's religiosity publicly is what makes hijab policing an inherently gender-based double standard. This is nonsense on its face. What do you mean? Like, Muslim men's religiosity is not an issue of public critique? Yeah, it is. Of course it is. Of course it is. If it's not, that's a problem. If we aren't policing in the sense of doing, enjoining good and forbidding evil of Muslim men, then yeah, I agree, that's a problem. But that's clearly not the case. That's clearly not the case. It's clearly not the case online either. Muslim men are constantly being called misogynists. They're constantly being told that they're sexually harassing others. That's policing. That's judgment. You're judging someone as being being a harasser. You're judging them as being a misogynist. You're judging them of being this kind of quote unquote alt bro. You're judging them as being toxic masculinity. Toxic masculinity is a completely judgment-laden term. It's a judgment-laden term that's not coming from Islam, of course. It's coming from feminism. But that's policing. That's judgment of men. Muslim girl is probably one of the most judgmental outlets from Muslims against men online, if you read some of their articles. So this is plainly, amusingly self-contradictory. But like the extent that you're saying that, telling a sister, so like with this Dina Tokyo situation, yeah, I agree. There's like a good and a bad way. There's a right and the wrong way to give nasiha. There's a right and a wrong way, a wise and an unwise way to enjoin good and forbid evil. Yeah, no doubt about it. I'm not questioning that aspect of it. But I think it's a good thing when you have this kind of reaction online, and it's good for her to get hundreds. If she does have 1 million followers, it's good if she's getting hundreds and thousands of people saying, this is wrong, don't do this, don't take off your hijab, keep it on. That's a good thing. That gives me hope. That Muslims care. Muslims are doing their part. Like, there's still a culture of shame. And the benefit of that, yeah, of course, we do, like, that's a part of judgment. That's a part of enjoining good and forbidding evil, is that the person should feel bad so that they don't continue in that bad behavior. They don't continue in that bad behavior, in the ithm. They change. That's a part of it. And feeling bad, that's the medicine. That's the medicine that will reform you, that will incentivize you to correct your behavior. Right? So this is something that's very necessary and important, to have a culture of shame. All of these places like Muslim Girl, and others who are saying, oh, we need, judgment is such a problem. We need judgment-free zones. We need to stop this harassment. No, like, absolutely not. We need more of it. We need more judgment. We need more shaming. That's what we need to be a healthy ummah, to be a healthy community. So this is my message, really, to those of you listening, is don't let up. Don't let them, ironically, don't let them shame you into silence. Right? They're shaming you based on this other standard of morality. Don't let them do that. No, you have to, don't ever, again, with wisdom, but if you have the opportunity to enjoin good and forbid evil, and you suspect, and to the best of your knowledge, doing so is going to have a net positive effect, then of course you need to do it. This is what the Prophet ﷺ has commanded. This is what Allah has commanded and His Messenger have commanded. So we can't abandon this important duty that we all have. Another really crazy example on this issue of judgment, I wrote on it on MuslimSkeptic.com. Western academics are advising that telling women not to drink during pregnancy is sexist. Western academics are saying that to tell women not to drink during pregnancy is sexist. Drink or smoke. So another example of Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi anil Munkar. And this is an example where, again, Islamic ethics and the secular liberal ethics are aligned. Are you going to really jeopardize the health of a fetus, of an infant, of a newborn by drinking and smoking? But the recommendation, what these researchers are saying, is that victim blaming needs to end. And the stigma against drinking alcohol while pregnant needs to end, because it's based on a moral judgment of the mother instead of the level of risk to an unborn child. This is nonsense. What do you mean it's based on moral judgment of the mother instead of the level of risk to an unborn child? Those things are intimately tied. The moral judgment is due to the concern with the unborn child, to the concern of the well-being of that child. How are you decoupling those two? They're related. The moral judgment of the mother is because she's endangering the child. This is nonsense. This is absolute nonsense. And this is also related to hijab, which is a point that I wanted to make. Let me bring it back. Hold on one second. Let me bring it back to an article that I wrote back in the day. I think it's been over 4 years. Let me check. Hold on. Yeah, I got blasted for this article. I got really blasted for it. This is back in the day, so people nowadays say that, oh, Daniel, you're so, like, why are you so in your face, and why are you so, where's your adab, and you need to tone it down. Like, this is not something new. People have been telling me this for a long time, even though, as I explained in the past, I'm not, like, cursing. I'm not, like, I don't think what I'm doing is bad adab, and others will confirm that and have confirmed that. But I was getting that kind of criticism on my tone from way long ago when I just started, really contributing to social media and writing for different websites. So here's the article. The Hypocrisy of Feminist Outrage. This was published by Muslim Matters. This is one of my favorite articles I've written, in the sense that I had to do research for writing it, so I learned a lot, and I helped myself in writing it to get a better understanding of certain issues. But it was met with a lot of anger by feminists. Why? Because basically in this article, I point out that women dressing inappropriately doesn't happen in a vacuum. Women dressing inappropriately has an effect on society. It has an effect on everyone around them. And that kind of negative impact is something that should be regulated and should be curbed. And this is what a dress code means. This is what a dress code means. Every society, every organized community has a dress code. If you go to your place of work, if you go to the university classroom, if you're within the public areas of the university, if you're walking down the street, if you go to the park, if you go to any public place, there's a standard of dress. There's a standard of what is or is not appropriate. Everywhere. This is something universal. This is something absolutely universal. But what is the standard of appropriateness based on? In Islam, the standard of appropriateness is based on what Allah says, what the Creator says. The Creator, knowing human beings, knowing the male, knowing the female, knowing how the human mind works, because He is the creator of the human mind. Knowing how our desires work, because He is the creator of our bodies and our desires and our psychology. Our standards of appropriate dress are based on what the Creator has said. What are the standards that these people are implementing and enforcing by law and by codes of ethics and dress codes and so on? What are their standards based on? Tell me this. Tell me. And there's a double standard here when it comes to between male and female as well. Because you have these feminists who are talking about well, don't judge me for what I wear. Don't police me for how I cover or do not cover my body. But what about men? The thing is that all of these countries, look at the most liberal countries, France, Denmark, Holland, Germany, Canada, whatever. They all have indecent exposure laws. Indecent exposure. This is an important concept. If a man exposes himself publicly or even privately by sending pictures of his genitalia through the phone, this is a big problem. This is considered harassment. This is considered causing harm, causing a public disturbance. This individual who is exposing his body, uncovering his body in such a way, has to be prosecuted to the full extent of the law. This is what indecent exposure laws are all about. These are what indecent exposure laws are all about. And who are they policing? Men. What about a woman? What about a woman who exposes herself, who is dressed in such tight-fitting clothes that you can see every contour of her body? She's dressed, but it's as if she's naked. Isn't that harassment? Isn't that an assault on decency, public decency? Isn't that something that affects the character of society, the character of the public? Doesn't that have an impact on the minds of people, adults, the minds of children? This is common sense. This is very common sense. But we have the hypersexualization of society going on all around us. Bombarded by pornographic images all around us. That has an impact on people's psychology. This is the decadence that destroys civilization. This is the decadence that drives people to promiscuity, that riles up within people their desires, their shahawat. This is a huge harm. This is an existential threat. Existential threat to humanity, to civilization. The way that women dress. But no. What we are reading from... Look, I really don't care what the random feminist Muslim says about hijab. I couldn't really care less about what the random feminist Muslima has to say about hijab. They're confused, obviously, on many different levels. We shouldn't care. But when I start seeing the quote-unquote traditional conservative Muslima who is speaking at the masjid, who is speaking at the Islamic conventions, when they start making statements like, oh, the hijab, this is just a ritual and everyone has the choice. You can choose if you want to wear it or not. It's just a choice. That's when I get worried. That's when I start being concerned, because this is going to affect the way that the community understands Islam. The way that the community understands hijab. Hijab is not a piece of cloth that you wrap around your head. This is a misconception about what hijab is. Hijab involves much more than just what parts of your head are covered. It's an entire system of modesty. How you act, how you behave, how you show yourself. Okay? Are you really abiding by the ethics of hijab if you have wrapped something around your head and then you're doing a photo shoot for Playboy magazine? Like that one sister did a few years ago? Is that really modesty? Is that really abiding by the ethic, the spirit of hijab? Or you're wearing hijab and then you're going and like boxing, right? You're involved in a boxing sport, televised, and is that really you're modest? Are you really modest if you have on a hijab? In the sense of a scarf, you have a scarf and then you're going and like to the movies with a guy with a bunch of people, Or you're going to a restaurant and you're all sitting together, guys and girls, unmarried, non-mahram, laughing and joking and drinking and eating together. Is this really hijab? Are you abiding by hijab? That's right, I'm judging. I'm doing a lot of judging today. And this idea of hijab is just this empty ritual. It's just a ritual. There's no practical purpose. There's no practical benefit to hijab. This is the argument that I'm hearing. I'm hearing from people. So, this is a problem. It's a problem. Let me show you another article. Just give me 1 second. Speaking of Muslim Matters, this was also published on Muslim Matters. Hijab Fixation. Written by someone named Reem. So what does she say? One day my 18-year-old son messaged me. Islamic schools should require girls to wear hijab as part of school uniform, period. This is a tweet. Someone said, what do you think of this? And then someone else said, yeah, I agree with that. But they should be asked to dress modestly. Should Islamic schools require girls to wear hijab as part of school uniform? How does that make sense? It's an Islamic school. You're in an Islamic school, but you're not abiding by Islamic dress code? The university has a dress code. The workplace has a dress code. You can't dress however you want and go into the corporate world, go through a corporate job. You don't have no freedom to choose, and you shouldn't. Why should you have a freedom of choose? It's a professional environment. It's professional. The university, it's a professional environment. People are there to study. People are there to learn at the university or whatever. We just established how much of an impact dress can have. People recognize the importance and the practical impact of dress when it's men's bodies. It's common sense, it's obvious. But then when it's about women's bodies, or how much women should cover, then we can't understand, we can't conceptualize, we can't even conceive of how a woman's dress, whether she wears something or doesn't wear something, her dress code, how that can have a tangible, practical impact on an environment, on a culture, on an ethic, on people's psychology. This is cognitive dissonance. These double standards are so severe. This irrationality is so severe that the only way I can explain it is cognitive dissonance. So then this message continues, the messaging. So the original tweet was, Islamic schools should never require girls to wear hijab as part of the school uniform. And then someone says, it's wild how a tweet like this can get 156 likes. Like, I don't care how much of a hoe you are and how much you try to explain how much you don't wear hijab. Like, good for you, but hijab is 100% an obligation in Islam. Literally, none of your hortivities can change that. Okay, so this is pretty charged language he's using. I think it's taking it too far maybe to liken a Muslim woman who doesn't wear hijab to a prostitute. So I wouldn't recommend talking like that. But the sentiment of frustration and sigh and annoyance, like, of course it's an Islamic school. Hijab is an obligation. Islam has a dress code for both men and women. Of course the dress code is not equal between men and women. Of course the dress code is not equal. Why? Because men and women are different. A woman's body is different from a man's body. The way that men interact and are affected by visual stimuli is different than the way the way that women are affected by that same kind of stimulus. This makes a difference. This makes a big difference. This is why, again, the Creator who has created us, who knows our psychology, who is the one who sent the perfect ethical system and the perfect dress code and system of behavior, the entire system of hijab, to address this. You're not practicing hijab like these Islamic schools. It's not really hijab if you have a dress code that has the girl students dressed in a certain way, but you're just having a mixed environment with girls and guys just playing with each other and having fun and interacting. That kind of ikhtilat, that kind of mixing, that's not Islamic either. That's violating hijab, principles of modesty. Right. So this article is all about criticizing the idea that an Islamic school, or criticizing this hijab fixation, right? People who are concerned about hijab, men who are concerned about hijab, have a fixation. Fixation means what? It's like a psychological problem. If you're fixated on something, this is a term that comes from psychology. Those who have a fixation have an obsession, an unhealthy obsession that is not it's not healthy, it's not appropriate. So this is what this article is arguing for. Muslims need to stop worrying about a woman's choice, a woman's choice to wear the hijab. But it's not a choice. Okay, this is a confusion. Wearing hijab is not a choice. Okay, and I have an article on Muslim Matters on exactly this topic. If you really want to read about it in depth, here, I'll share it in a second. Yeah. A lot of Muslim Matters today. So this is the article I wrote. Hijab and sex. Does Islam respect free choice? It's a very simple argument. What do we mean when we say choice? Okay. When we say choice, when I say that hijab is not about choice, do I mean that literally a Muslim woman cannot choose? She doesn't have the free will to choose to wear hijab? Of course she does. She has the free will, right? She can decide to wear it or not. But that kind of choice, meaning the physical ability to choose something, that's one kind of choice, but that shouldn't be conflated with choice in the sense of moral choice. Let me ask you, do you have the choice to go out and, let's say run a red light, to violate traffic laws? Do you have the choice to go out and drive 100 miles per hour in the streets? Do you have that choice? In the sense of free will, yeah, you can get in your car, put your foot on the gas, and you can blast through all the red lights. You can drive 100 miles per hour. You even have the choice to run over pedestrians. You can go on a rampage. You can kill as many people as you want. You have the choice. You have the choice to do that. But that's not what we mean when we say, do you have the choice to go on a killing spree? That's not what we mean. What we mean is it right? Is it morally acceptable? Is it halal? Are there consequences, moral consequences, in terms of punishment? This is the moral, normative notion of choice. So is hijab a choice? Is hijab a choice? No. It's not a choice. It's not a choice. Because if just like any kind of ethical requirement within the Sharia, any ethical requirement, if you violate the Sharia, if you violate Allah's commands, then you are liable for punishment. You are liable for punishment. For example, if I go out and I drink alcohol, do I have the choice to go out and get wasted? No, I don't have the choice because I'm liable for punishment. It's not something that is mubah, in other words, in terms of fiqh. Is it permissible? Is it mubah? No. There are certain things that are mubah in fiqh. Do I, buy this kind of shoes? Do I buy Nikes or do I buy Adidas? All things being equal, either choice is fine. I'm not going to be liable for punishment for either of those. I'm not going to be rewarded either. There's not necessarily more reward. Allah is not going to reward me for choosing Nikes over Adidas, all things being equal, or vice versa. So this is what's mubah within fiqh. But hijab is not mubah. It's not an issue of not wearing it is not permissible. There is a liability. All things being equal, a person is liable to be punished by Allah for that choice that they make. So it's not a free choice. It's very simple. This whole question of is hijab a choice? Like, how much ink has been spilt on such a simple issue? All because you're conflating the literal meaning of a physical ability to choose with the ethical, normative understanding or notion of choice. Okay, let's pause for some questions. Abu Mujaddid says wearing hijab is as much a choice as not praying. Exactly. Muhammad Shah says that's what I was expecting. Judgment is essential for a healthy society. Abu Luay says if it was not allowed in Islam to judge people based on what is apparent, then a science like al-jahr wa ta'dil would never have existed. Yeah, of course. How are you going to judge whether, ilm al-rijal, how are you going to judge whether a certain narrator of hadith is trustworthy? How can you determine this, within this isnad, the status of each of the links in the chain? Are they trustworthy in transmitting the hadith? Are they upright? All of these standards within ilm al-rijal, within the hadith sciences that are so important within our deen, that requires judgment. We have a standard of judgment that the scholars of hadith have set and elaborated on how we can have confidence in whether a hadith, the different grades of a hadith, all requires judgment. Okay, now let me go to YouTube. Inan says, my wife dresses the hijab by herself. She never looks so beautiful for me, alhamdulillah. Yeah, of course. There's nothing more beautiful than obeying Allah. There's nothing more beautiful than being obedient to one's creator. Let's see. I'm looking for questions more than comments here. Okay. Okay. If there are any questions, just put them in the chat right now so I can see it. I'll come back to them. All right, let's talk about third spaces. This is something that's been going on for, I would say it's a phenomenon that's less than 10 years old. In the Muslim community, at least. But I think that third spaces are dying. This is what I claimed when I posted about this episode of Muslim Skeptic Live, is that third spaces are dying. And what I mean by that is that many of them pop up. They last for maybe 2 or 3 years, but then they fall out and they don't continue. They don't show much sustainability over time. And let's look at this and understand why this happens. So the notion of a third space, where does that even come from? Sometimes it's called third space. Sometimes it's called third place. But it's coming from a sociologist named Gary Oldenburg. Gary Oldenburg. And he wrote a book called The Great Good Place. And in this book, he talks about how societies, healthy societies, need space that's not home, but it's not work. It's a third space between home and work where people can go and they can just relax and they can socialize and they can be themselves and they can be with those that they care about and talk and interact. And this is something that's healthy and it's needed, but it's something that increasingly doesn't exist in modern society because people are so busy with work and their careers that when they come home, they're so tired and exhausted that they don't really have the energy to be involved with friends and socialize except on the weekends. And even on the weekends, people tend to stay at home or they're more private or what have you. So there's this need for a third space that people can enjoy and that's needed for them psychologically. And so this idea of a third space was taken by Christians and Jews, and they wanted to create religious third spaces. Third spaces that are not the church, not the synagogue. They don't have that kind of formalism of a religious place of worship, but they're still religious and they are meant for socializing, for kicking back, relaxing, but still have a kind of religious sentiment or feel. So this idea of the third space originated in sociology. Gary Oldenburg wrote his book, I believe, in 1991, so it's not even that far back. But now Muslims have adopted this. Muslims have adopted this, and the marketing for it and the way that many of these third spaces present themselves is as an alternative to the masjid. An alternative to the masjid. And I'll tell you exactly what that means in a second. So let me just, again, take a step back and look at it analytically and in the abstract. I think that, this idea of a place where people can socialize and enjoy each other's company and have fun, This is absolutely important. It's critical. It's something that everyone needs to some extent. Okay, if you're more of an introverted person like me, maybe you have less of a need for it, but there's still a need that everyone has to have at a minimal level. And when we look at Islamic societies, historically, the masjid wasn't the location where people would go to socialize with other Muslims. You would go to other locations, even in the Muslim world today. You have cafes, you have the nadi, you have the club, you have the not like the bar or like the dance club, but they have like sports clubs within countries like Egypt and throughout the Muslim world. These alternative spaces where you can go and spend some time with your friends, kick back, maybe play some foosball, play some ping pong, have fun. Yeah, this is something that is ubiquitous. It's something that's very needed. It's not the masjid that these activities are happening at. The masjid is literally for salah, for Friday prayer, and i'tikaf, but it's not necessarily where you're going to go and socialize. Within the West, within the modern West, what has happened is that's what the masajid have become. They've become community centers. And a lot of social activities are happening at the masajid. Now, is this a bad thing? No, I don't think that it's a bad thing. It's different. It can potentially have drawbacks. But for the most part, no, there's nothing wrong with this kind of community center model of a masjid. It's filling an important need. And all of the people who are volunteering, the imams and the scholars who are at these masajid, who are facilitating these masajid and these community centers, they're doing a great service, and we have to support them financially or morally, give them moral support. So there's nothing wrong with that. That's definitely something that's needed. But what do we have now? We have these third spaces that are marketing themselves as an alternative to the masjid. An alternative, non-judgmental alternative to the masjid. And the argument that they give and the way that they present themselves in the marketing is to say that the masjid is full of these foreign imams, these intolerant uncles and aunties who just don't understand us, and they're judging us, and they make us feel uncomfortable, and we need our own space. We need to have a third space where we can just practice Islam, how we see fit. And this is the kind of marketing that they use to try to convince the Muslim community that their existence is justified. So basically they throw masajid under the bus. They throw foreign imams, quote unquote, under the bus to bring themselves up and to make themselves appear as, so important and so crucial and providing such a good service. So I'm not saying that all masajid are perfect. There are definitely some masajid that have problems. No doubt. There are some masajid that are, have some corrupt board members or are facing other kinds of issues. No doubt. But it's a minority. The majority are not like this. The majority are not intolerant. The majority are not exclusionary and judgmental and so on and so forth. So to portray our masajid in that light is very wrong. So let me give you some pictures so you can see what these third spaces look like. So this is a third space that was recently launched and advertised in the UK called The Cave. A lot of discussion was going on over the weekend regarding this cave. And so they have a public page, and they advertise and show pictures of their events and programming. So it's kind of like a pit of people, guys and girls, all in the happy circle. I don't know what this guy is talking about, but a lot of people not wearing hijab. This is one picture. Another from the cave. Sisters looking on with admiration, all made up. A lot of makeup there. Enjoying the dars, I guess. I think it might have been like a music session, because in other pictures there's a person with a guitar playing guitar for the sisters and having just a nice moment there, spiritual, I'm sure. Another shot, very artistically done photo here, making sure to get the sisters in the photo, just in case we forgot that there are sisters, that there are Muslim women at the event. God forbid that they're not in the picture. Then we wouldn't know how inclusive and welcoming this is. So you have this kind of third space. How do they advertise it? So let me read you a quote from their page. "We want the cave to become an open, non-judgmental environment where everyone can come and get to know each other and become a part of the community." It's just touching, heartwarming. Non-judgmental. Oh. Non-judgmental for, if you want to come and check out the girls. Yeah, we're not going to judge you. You can come sit right next to a sister, and then we're going to play some nice music, some nasheed. You can sway and have some fun. No judgment. Wear hijab, don't wear hijab. It's okay. It's your choice. It's your choice, sister. So this is the problem. Here, let me show you something else that I think you will be shocked to see. Here's another third space. Let me check the sound. That's plenty. That's plenty to give you a sense of what's happening here. Again, music, just mixing, everyone getting together. Wear hijab, don't wear hijab. Let's just get in a big circle and embrace each other because we're so tolerant and so loving. So to present this as religiously acceptable, it's an injustice. It's an injustice. And especially for new Muslims, for new Muslims to think that this is what Islam is about, or that this is what Islam calls for. That's a big injustice. This is dhulm. You're distorting the religion. You're distorting the religion for those people, giving it a veil of religious legitimacy. So, third spaces, the idea of having a place where you can socialize and get together and have fun with the bros or sisters, get together, have fun, enjoy each other's company. I'm all for that. Who can be against that? But why does it have to be mixed? Why do you have to violate Islam in this way? It's very clear that this is not appropriate. This is not appropriate to get in front of each other all made up. And it's also the guys too. It's not just the sisters. The guys know that they're coming to an environment where there's going to be eligible sisters sitting right, within arm's length of them. Put on the, the cologne, make sure you got the beard exactly cut exactly right, trimmed it exactly, the right way. Not like this, clean, shaven, perfect, hair just on point, wearing the best threads. And you're coming there for a spiritual retreat or whatever. A night of spiritual music or nasheed or whatever. So, yeah, and this idea that, we can control ourselves. Not everything is about sex. We can control ourselves. Just because I'm in the same room as a woman, as a Muslim sister, doesn't mean I'm thinking about sex. I can control myself. Muslim guys need to control themselves. It's nonsense. This is so stupid. I hate seeing people who will make this argument and think that they're making such a profound point. It's not in your hands. The shahwa is not something that you can control. Desire is not something that you can control. The whisper of shaitan, the waswasa, is not something that is in your hands to control yourself, quote unquote. You control the action. You can control yourself by not going to certain places where you are more liable to feel those desires, or you're more liable to be influenced by waswasa. You're more liable to have shaitan affect you. You have a decision to make to prevent yourself from exposing yourself to such environments. But, this is... how can you really focus on anything as a sister or as a brother, and you're the opposite sex, marriageable, or is right across from you? You think that your eyes are not going to move in that direction? You're not going to think, was so-and-so looking at me? Did so-and-so notice me? Did that brother, did he look my way? Is my hijab on straight? Is my lipstick on right? My lip gloss, is it shiny enough? You think that those thoughts aren't going through your head? It's not in your control. It's not something that you can, even if you wanted to, you could take out of your mind. Let's be real. We're realists. As Muslims, we're realists about human nature. Islam is a realist religion in the sense that Allah has created our natures. And He has legislated the Sharia in light of who we are. Allah has told us, and the Prophet ﷺ has given us guidance regarding hijab as an entire system. Going and singing and dancing and sitting, right next to the opposite sex, this is not hijab. So one thing that is the point that I made earlier is that these third spaces, they just don't last. They really don't last. They have a lifespan that's very short. And why is that? And I think there's a good reason for it. It's a very common sense reason. And we can understand it by looking at churches and synagogues in the West. There have been studies that show that the more liberal churches, the churches that are more accommodating of pop culture and are less strict when it comes to the practice of the people attending those churches and synagogues, those more liberal churches are dropping in number. Fewer and fewer people are attending those churches. Those are the churches that are getting closed down because no one is going to them anymore. Whereas the more conservative churches, the more conservative synagogues that are more strict when it comes to avoiding certain trends within pop culture, the certain influences of this decadent culture in which we live, those churches actually are growing in number. More people are going to those churches. They last longer. They're open for longer periods of time. And there are studies that have proven this. Let me see if I have the link. There's an article that I usually cite from the Washington Post, but it's behind a paywall. Sorry. Let me open it. Liberal churches are dying, but conservative churches are thriving. This is an article from 2017 in the Washington Post. A Canadian study found that conservative churches are still growing while less orthodox congregations dwindle away. And the article starts by saying, mainline Protestant churches are in trouble. A 2015 report by the Pew Research Center found that these congregations, once a mainstay of American religion, are now shrinking by 1 million members annually. Fewer members not only means fewer souls saved, a frightening thought for some clergy members, but also less income for churches, further ensuring their decline. So they conducted a study. They looked at all these different churches, and the less orthodox, more liberal churches are losing the most congregants. This seems to be counterintuitive. You might think that, oh, well, if a religious institution was less liberal, less strict, was more willing to accommodate different kinds of pop culture trends and certain kinds of sexual behavior, that numbers would increase, that would be very attractive, that people would flock to religious institutions like that. Like these, third spaces like the cave or whatever. People would be flocking to them. But the exact opposite is happening. People are leaving them. People are going to the more conservative places of worship, more conservative religious institutions that are more strict and demanding. So why does this happen? I think it's obvious. I think it's very much common sense. The more that these religious spaces resemble what everyone else is offering, then there's less incentive. There's less reason for a person to go to the religious space as opposed to everywhere else. Do you see what I'm saying here? If the church is going to be, playing music, and it's going to have essentially a rock concert for its religious service, and it's going to, tolerate people dressing, like they would dress at the club promiscuously, and the church is not going to teach about certain values because it contradicts liberal norms, what's culturally dominant, then why bother? Why bother going to that church? It seems like that church is so accepting. That church is so accommodating that I'm just good however I am. Whatever I do, there's no judgment. God is okay with it. That's the message I'm getting from this liberal church, that God is fine with the way that I already am. So why do I need to bother with a church? Why do I need to even go to a church? All that church has done is legitimate the things that I was already doing in my life without the church. Right? Same thing with these third spaces, like the cave or others. Like in the US, another one that I didn't want to get into in depth, Tatlif Collective, okay, things like that, or Make Space or what have you. You have these different third spaces. All that some of these third spaces are doing are legitimating things like gender mixing. They're legitimating as this is religiously okay to dress yourself up and go party with the opposite sex and go socialize with the opposite sex. It's all they're doing is religiously legitimating. Like Islamically, it's okay for you to go to a concert and listen to like this kind of music and hang out and party. It's okay. That's what we're doing in this third space. We're just hanging out, having dinner together, fun, right? Socializing. All that these religious, they think that, this is their delusion. They think that they're making it more welcoming and attractive. But what they're really doing is they're legitimating these practices. So the person has a choice now. Do I want to go to this third space? Or do I want to go to the bar? Do I want to go to the club? Do I want to go to this concert? Well, before I thought that, I want to go to a religious space because I want to connect with Allah. I want to turn to Allah. I want to make tawbah. I want to make istighfar. I want to elevate my spiritual state by worshiping Allah, being obedient to Him, and turning away from these bad influences in my life. But now, thanks to the third space, I've recognized that, there's nothing wrong with these kinds of things. There's nothing wrong with that kind of behavior that I was engaged in otherwise, and that is culturally dominant. There's no problem with it. So I kind of prefer to go just do what I was already doing. I kind of prefer to go to the spaces that are pretty easy to frequent, that are surrounding me all over. So this is, it's sad, but it's kind of amusing how deluded people can be. Like the people who are organizing these third spaces, and we're so welcoming, and this and that. No judgment. It's a judgment-free zone. These third spaces are judging the masajid. They're constantly judging the masajid by saying, this is like an intolerant. These masajid are intolerant, so that's why we have to set up our own space. And that's the epitome of judgment. Another thing or another objection that people bring is, these third spaces perform a valuable service because of tadarruj or tadrij, in the sense that gradualism, Muslims who are not as observant in their lives now, they need to have a kind of gradualistic program where they can become better and stronger Muslims. So we have to be gradual with their learning of Islam, their practice of Islam, if we kind of confront them with everything, they're going to be turned away, they're going to feel judged, and they're going to leave Islam, or they're going to be alienated from the community. So these third spaces are providing a valuable service in terms of gradualism, tadarruj. Of course, gradualism is an important principle. This is an important principle within helping others within your family, within your social circle, your friend, bringing them into closer to Islam, bringing them closer to this point of making tawbah. Yeah, of course, but that's something on an individual, interpersonal level, right? You want gradualism with one person in your relationship, or an imam's relationship with one person. But you don't have that kind of gradualism for an entire community or an entire institution. You don't advertise that kind, because the message is not directed towards one person when you post these images on Facebook and social media and so on and so forth. That's projecting a message that no, this is acceptable in Islam. This kind of behavior is acceptable in Islam, right? If there's a Muslim brother who has a problem with alcohol, and he has a problem with going to the bar, going to the club, yeah, it's our responsibility to help that brother come out of that and to help him leave that. And so how do you do that in the most wise way? This is hikmah that's required. And it's not going to always work to just go and blast him. This is why I made that note earlier in the episode where I said that we have to approach Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi Anil Munkar with wisdom. And you have to be able to calculate what is going to bring about the most net benefit in this particular situation. So there's a lot of contextual factors that go into nasiha when it's on a one-on-one level with someone. That brother, I have to find a way to help him because I care about him. I have compassion for him. I want the best for him. And so it is out of this place of compassion that I'm advising him. And same with hijab. It's out of compassion and care for our sisters that we're advising them in this way, and that we're judging them and creating a culture of shame and judgment, right? Similarly, with this brother, I'm trying to help him. But that doesn't mean I turn my house or my masjid or my third space into a bar, into a club, to make him feel more welcome. That's the exact wrong approach. If I do that, then he will get the message that, oh, well, drinking and clubbing and having fun is religiously legitimate. That's the message that is going to be taken from that. So yes, tadarruj is important. Gradualism is important. But you're not going to get that from changing our institutions, changing our masajid, changing our MSAs. MSAs, like this is a perennial issue with every MSA that I've ever interacted with. When I was an undergrad, when I was a graduate student, even in high school, I was in an MSA in high school. They have this issue, like, do we want to be more, if we're too conservative, we're going to drive people away. So we need to be less conservative, we need to be less orthodox, we need to allow for certain things like gender mixing and having like these kinds of inappropriate events, because that will make it more welcoming. People will come to the MSA when they see that we're laid back and we are cool with all of these things that are dominant within the culture. But again, this is the exact opposite. This will have the exact opposite effect. If the MSA becomes just like every other club, why bother coming to the MSA? The only reason someone would come to the MSA and dedicate their free time to the MSA is if the MSA has a unique value proposition. If the MSA is offering something different. That is the purpose of the MSA. The MSA is not supposed to be the primary purpose of the MSA. Not to be some happy family where guys and girls get together and love each other and be lovey-dovey. The primary purpose of the MSA is to bring people closer to Allah, bring Muslims and non-Muslims closer to Allah. That is the primary purpose. How can you bring people closer to Allah if you're constantly violating the commands of Allah and projecting that violation of the commands of Allah is religiously legitimate? That's the exact opposite of the purpose of an MSA or an Islamic society. But people just don't get that idea. They think that, oh, well, if we violate the commands of Allah, there's a purpose that justifies it. We need to be more welcoming. And so then the ends justify the means. If we have more people in the MSA, then that justifies being more lax when it comes to certain issues like gender mixing and so forth. But no, this is even if that were justified, even if you could justify the ends through, or justify the means through the ends, it won't work. Like, those ends won't be obtained. You're not going to see a surge in numbers when the MSA becomes just like every other club, because the MSA is no longer offering what's unique to the MSA. What's unique is to bring people closer to Allah. No other club can do that. No other club can do that except the Islamic Society. Through programming, through having halaqat, through having study circles with knowledgeable brothers and sisters, through having single-sex, non-mixed events. This is something so valuable. Men need to be with other men. Brothers need to be with brothers. Sisters need to be with sisters. How can you really how can you comfortably socialize if you're constantly worried about the opposite sex and looking good for the opposite sex? And, is he checking me out? Am I checking her out? Blah, 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 blah. How can you be comfortable in that environment? Have people even thought of this? Like, forget about... Like, let's put aside the question of what's Islamically legitimate, because that's clear. But let's, for a second, put that aside. Even from a secular point of view, people recognize that psychologically, men need to be with men, women need to be with women. As far as socializing, makes perfect sense. And those who are constantly with the opposite sex in their social circumstances, they're really missing out. They're missing out, and they arguably they're not having certain social needs met. There's a deficit there because constantly they're in front of the opposite sex. They can't be themselves. Like, there's a big difference between men around themselves, brothers around themselves, the way that they talk, the way they act, the way that they socialize. You add one woman into that environment, and the dynamic completely changes. The dynamic completely changes. And I'm sure the same is the same for sisters. My wife tells me the same thing. It's like, sisters need to have their own space. If there's any guy present, then we can't be ourselves. Yeah, so there are a lot of stories about this of like Islamic institutes or seminaries, Islamic seminaries even, where the brothers have their own space and the sisters. So there was one seminary institution that they contacted me and they said, Daniel, we'd like you to come talk to the students about the issue of feminism and also gender mixing, because this is an issue that we're having a lot of problems with. And I said, okay, sure, but can you give me background? What's the problem? Like, well, we had a brother space and a sister space. They're separate. There's not really a partition. The brothers and sisters can see each other, even though they're separate. But basically, we had a ping pong table for the brothers in the brother space. And so the sisters complained that they also wanted to play ping pong. And so we said, okay, well, we can get you a ping pong table. So we bought it, we installed it, we put it there in the sisters section, and so the sisters could play ping pong there as well. But that didn't stop the complaints. The sister said, no, 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 no. We want to be able to play ping pong with the guys. We want to be able to play ping pong with the guys. Or at least we want to have the guys present while we play, and for us to be present while they play. This is what these sisters were complaining about. So clearly influenced by feminism, because this is a complete feminist mentality. They have this idea that gender separation is gender apartheid. Gender apartheid. This is the kind of extreme language that they use. And so they want to, any kind of segregation or separation of the sexes is inherently unjust. So this is at an Islamic institution. Like these are men and women who are dedicating themselves, young men and women who are dedicating themselves to learning Islam. They're dedicating themselves to learning Islam. And this is the kind of mentality that they have. This is how toxic feminism is. I mean, it's just mind-boggling. I can barely conceive of how this is possible. Like, I think it's a joke. Like, are you joking with me? This is the kind of complaints that you're getting in the Islamic seminary, where they're trying to learn fiqh, and they're trying to learn hadith, and they're trying to learn tafsir, and these are the issues that are causing problems for you. So yeah, so here's a comment from Anti-Hospara. Stop saying gender. The concept of gender is un-Islamic and anti-biology. I'm not using gender in the sense of the women's studies notion of gender. Yeah, I mean that within the gender studies, women's studies, they make this distinction between gender and sex. And they say, well, you can be a part of a certain sex, like you can be biologically male or biologically female, but your gender is something else entirely. You choose your gender, blah, blah, blah. I mean, there's this whole ontology that they've created. Yeah, I'm not using gender in that sense. I'm using gender in the sense of jins, or gender in the sense of you can be man or woman. There's not a problem with that term. The term gender predates, as an English word, far predates the third wave feminist gender bending ideology. Okay, 5 more minutes and I have to go. So let me just address some questions before concluding. Yeah, so just to wrap up, we talked about don't judge me, the value of judgment, the necessity of judgment when it comes to Amr bil Ma'ruf wa Nahi Anil Munkar. How this is an obligation. It's necessary to create a culture where we are advising ourselves. We're constantly aware of what is right and wrong, and we advise each other openly, and we don't silence ourselves because of this, oh, don't judge me, bro. And then we talk about hijab, and we talk about third spaces. So let's look at questions and then conclude. Facebook is not a good... It's like not showing me the previous questions. So Brother Yusuf says, did you see the Unmasked documentary film? Yeah, so that was a documentary that came out, I think maybe 4 years ago or maybe more. But they wanted to talk about this phenomenon of people getting disillusioned with masajid and traditional religious institutions, so they are unmasked. They don't want to have anything to do with the mosque, the intolerant masjid environment. So again, I acknowledge that there are people who act badly. There are Muslims who are rude and they don't advise others with hikmah. And sometimes, uncles and aunties, they can be stubborn, or they can be, that's just natural. Like people who get older will sometimes be more stubborn, or they'll be more direct in their criticisms. But that's part of what it means to be merciful and patient and generous with the elderly, which is such an important Islamic value. But I acknowledge that if you are not expecting that and you come across the wrong person, you can feel bad that, oh, I've been reprimanded or I've been advised, and that makes me feel bad. I no longer want to come to the masjid. Yeah, it's possible. Like, I'm sure that things like that happen, but we have to be part of what we should do is to help those people understand that, look, this is just one bad experience that you have. It doesn't color the entire institution of the masjid. You shouldn't dismiss masajid and be unmasked just because of a bad experience, right? Okay, so this brother asks, Assalamu alaikum, I'm from India. My question is how to deal with the co-ed system of universities, especially when you're assigned tasks and assignments by university to do in collaboration with a person of the opposite gender. So in this situation, how can we make enough distance from the person so that it does not violate the Islamic ruling of hijab between the two genders? Yeah, you have to try your best. It's unfortunate that places like India are adopting co-education. Because even within the West, co-education was unheard of prior to the 60s. And this is something new that was created, that men and women should be in the same classes together, in the same dormitories together. Prior to the 60s, there was no co-education. There's very strict separation. You had the men's campus and then the women's campus. And then what happened historically is the men's universities realized that if we want to become more attractive to potential students, to prospective students, why don't we allow co-education so that the young men will say, oh, well, I prefer to go to the university where I have easy access to women, easy access for whatever, dating or sex in the dorm, go to class with women. That's something that I would love to do. And so they created this co-educational environment, not as a kind of gender equality, we want to help women. In fact, they were using women as a kind of bait to make the university more attractive to young men. And so then that became the standard, the co-educational standard, and you hardly find any university. I think it's actually illegal to have an all-male university. Actually, I'm not sure if Title IX applies within U.S. law. But this is something that has spread now to India and all over the world. As far as practical advice, I went to Harvard, so it was definitely co-educational. Try as best as you can to avoid classes where you know that there's going to be a requirement to collaborate with the opposite sex. Usually there's not such a requirement. I'd be surprised if the professor says you have to be partnered with the opposite sex. If that's the case, then you can politely tell the professor that, look, this is against my religion. This is I would prefer to have a male partner or a partner of the same sex for this project. Usually professors can be very accommodating in that sense, and if they were forcing you have to work with the opposite sex, I have a hard time conceptualizing how that would take place. But even then, like, you can in Islam you can interact with the opposite sex when it's required. You can interact with the opposite sex if, like, in your workplace, in the university. You just have to maintain certain kinds of boundaries and limits of propriety in how you interact with the opposite sex. So Islam is not saying it within the Sharia, and this is something that studied from teachers, and they explain that it's not that all interaction is foreclosed and you can never interact with the opposite sex and that's by default haram. No, like, there are certain situations where there's a pressing need. There's a pressing need, or you have to, or it becomes too unreasonable to avoid. And these are all distinctions and categories that are defined very in a nuanced way within the fiqh. But in certain circumstances, it's unavoidable. So you just have to make sure that the kind of interaction that you have is appropriate. There's no flirting involved. There's no seclusion, khalwa. Okay, there's no seclusion where you're, or there's no, like, it's not a social thing. Like, oh, okay, we have the same project, we have to work together. Let's go have like a coffee, and then over some nice drinks, we'll work on our project together, right? So try to avoid as much as possible giving that kind of casual message that, oh, we're just, friends, or we're friends together. No, men and women can't be friends. Unmarried, non-mahram, men and women cannot be friends. And this is something even within the West, conservatives recognize, that you can look at articles that have been published. Men and women can't be friends because there's always the ulterior motive. There's always the sense of possible romance that is in the back of both the man's mind and the woman's mind, right? And again, this is not something that you can control. You can't just say, oh, just control yourself. You're an animal. Just control yourself. No. This is just natural. And so, as far as you have a professional, you have to interact professionally. You have to interact. You have no choice. Then you just have to make sure that you're abiding by the dictates of the Sharia. You're not touching, right? You're working with your partner on this project and you give him a pat on the back. Good job. Good job, partner. We did it. These things are prohibited, so you have to limit yourself to the best of your ability. And if you don't know these details, I can't summarize them in just 5 minutes to answer your question. You have to go actually study it. Go take a class online. I'm sure you can find many legitimate classes on gender mixing, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, what are the limits. Educate yourself on this issue. But also don't go to the other extreme, as some on Muslim social media, unfortunately, are propounding this nonsense that, oh, there's no such thing as, or there's nothing wrong with ikhtilat, there's nothing wrong with gender mixing, it's perfectly fine, there's nothing. This is nonsense, okay? They're poisoning people's minds with this garbage. Or things like, oh, the Prophet ﷺ, his masjid didn't have partitions. This is another nonsense argument about the Prophet ﷺ's masjid. Yeah, the Prophet's masjid didn't have a literal curtain, but do you also know about the environment where the sahabiyat, the female companions, were only attending salah at the masjid for after dark, such as Isha and Fajr, not during the day, and it's pitch black. You didn't have electricity and lamps. It was pitch black. They were covering themselves completely, niqab, covering their face with their khimar. and this is how they're going to the masjid, such that no one could recognize them. It's pitch black, dark. So yeah, if you want to replicate that situation in today's masajid, if you want to replicate that standard of dress for the women attending masajid today, okay, great. Then yes, by all means, replicate the architecture of the Prophet ﷺ's masjid in Medina. By all means. But if women are going to the masjid the way that you know they are, and men are going to the masjid the way that they are, then we need architecture. We need curtains. We need barriers. We need separate areas. We need all of this kind of separation. The separation existed in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, in his masjid. The Sahabiyat had a separate entrance. The Prophet ﷺ advised the men to, after Salah, not to turn around and look around, to just stay seated until the sisters left immediately after the Salah for those night prayers, and then the brothers. So that mixing was non-existent. People are ignorant of these details. They just have sound bites from Muslim social media that, oh, Ustad Fulan said the Prophet ﷺ's masjid didn't have any barriers. This is nonsense. This is ignorance. They're teaching ignorance, and they're so arrogant about it too. And condescending. Oh, you don't know anything because don't you know the Prophet ﷺ's masjid didn't have any barriers? Okay. So that's all I have for today. Thank you again for joining the live broadcast. Inshallah, the recording will be available as soon as the broadcast is ended, inshallah. And just check out MuslimSkeptic.com for more writing, updated almost daily. Check out alasna.org, which is a learning suite, my academy for teaching about liberalism, secularism, atheism, modernism, and many other subjects that are very important for Muslims today. You can register, enroll in our classes, enroll in the Institute, and you have access to all kinds of content in our growing course library. So inshallah, I'll catch you next week, same time, Tuesday. And I look forward to talking to you then. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.